Hi, everybody, and welcome. Hi, guys. If you are just joining, I could just see people tuning into the audio. Welcome, everybody, to our self-care club this evening. So all you will need for tonight, guys, is a pen and paper. So something to write on, something to write with, and then just a comfortable seat. I'm just going to open up our chat channel. Hi, Tara. Thank you for opening up our chat channel. If anyone would like to say hello, please do so in the chat. And we will get started. Hi, Kirsten. Thank you so much. So, guys, most of you know me by now. My name is Oakley, and I co-run the More Mind project here with the amazing Dr. Stephanie Minchin, who is joining us this evening. I will just, oh no, you're unmuted, Steph. Perfect. So I've got everyone else on mute, but Steph, you are unmuted, my love. And Steph is the yoga psychologist, and she also co-runs the More Mind project alongside me at More Yoga, which is something that we're really focusing on, bringing more awareness to mental well-being and helping to open up the discussion and support our community, especially during this time as we begin to kind of make our way out of lockdown and into a new normality. So tonight, Steph and I will be discussing a few things that have kind of come to light over the last few sessions we've run, and a few things that people have written in to ask us to talk about as well. And all of it is centered around this idea of managing our mental health better and being able to support ourselves, but also support each other during this time as well. So let me just let one more person in. There we go. Perfect. And guys, feel free to message in the chat at any point if you have a comment or a question or anything isn't making sense. And before I kind of introduce you properly to Steph, I'm going to invite everyone to take a comfortable seat, and we're going to begin with a breathing practice just to help everybody drop in, relax, and become different from whatever else has been going on throughout your day. So welcome, everybody. Let's come to a comfortable seat. Closing the eyes down, bowing the heads. You might like to give the head a little roll from side to side just to release any tension that might be caught up in the neck, in the shoulders. And let's just bring the hands down to rest on the knees, palms facing up in acceptance or in the lap, whatever's more comfortable. And I invite you to just bring your awareness to your breathing. And let's take a few deep breaths together, breathing into the nose and out through the mouth. Breathing into the nose, breathing out through the mouth. Taking one more deep, full breath in. And a long, full breath out. Now just connecting to a comfortable inhale and exhale through the nose. And just allowing your thoughts to become present. Just letting go of any distractions, any to-do lists from the day. And giving yourself permission to just be here in whatever capacity feels most comfortable for you. Listening, sharing, participating. And just allowing the breath to come to a gentle, comfortable rhythm, effortless inhale to effortless exhale. And maybe taking this moment of stillness, this pause, to set an intention for this group practice this evening. And when you're ready, just slowly beginning to blink the eyes open and come back into the space. Thank you, guys. And as always, if you're more comfortable with cameras off, you're welcome to have cameras off. If you'd like to join with the camera on, it's always lovely to see everybody's smiling faces. So whatever is best for you. And I am going to have a go at being technical this evening and move the spotlight over to Stephanie Minchin, who I can introduce you to now. And we'll start with a bit of Q&A and just discussing some themes that have come out from the past few weeks that we've been running this club, and some topics that people have asked us to discuss in a little bit more detail that can hopefully really help people to manage their mental health more effectively, and bring a little bit more self-care into your routine as well. So firstly, Steph, I'm just going to move our spotlight over to you. There we go. Thank you so much for joining us firstly this evening. And the first thing I think it was probably what everyone is wondering is how do you think lockdown has affected people's mental health from your work as a therapist and as a yoga therapist and a teacher? How do you think lockdown has kind of affected people?
I think it's inevitable that it can't not touch all of us. I suppose just to kind of introduce a little bit about the work that I do. So as a clinical psychologist, I currently work in mental health services with children, young people and families. So of course, within that, we've seen some kids having the time of their life not being at school, and other kids really, really struggling at home with sort of family relationship difficulties, really risky situations, unknown or kind of undisclosed violence at home. I think one of the things that struck me the most about lockdown was just how polarizing the whole situation has been, such that we can look on any level or context. Some of us have kept our employments, others have gone, no cash income, they had the carpet swept from under their feet. We've had people who have, tragically lost their lives because of the virus, and others of us that aren't deemed vulnerable. We've had people at home on furlough who are absolutely enjoying time with their children, and then we've had others of us that are perhaps feeling completely isolated and lonely with no contact for days on end. And that polarization itself can be incredibly conflictual at the community level. And something that sort of came to light with myself and my colleagues and having read different sort of papers and research is that this might sound like a big word, but trauma. So what we're experiencing at the moment, or have been, is a community level trauma. So what we know about trauma is that it's when our response to trauma is a traumatic event and it's unexpected. We don't all experience the same response to a traumatic event. Some of us will experience symptoms, other of us will not. What we do know is that those of us that do experience a traumatic, kind of response, is that we might be hypervigilant, we might be anxious, we might have dysregulated patterns with like our sleeping, our eating might be disturbed. We might be having worry thoughts about the future. It's this whole context of uncertainty that has almost led us into this kind of collective space of uncertainty, really.
No, definitely. And I think that word trauma is so relevant as well, and that a lot of the things we talked about in the past 5 weeks that we've been running this online group is the fact that so many of us are experiencing much more heightened levels of anxiety, of feeling lonely, of isolation, and of other kind of things that are really affecting our mental health. Steph, what would you kind of suggest to anyone who's really struggling with loneliness? That's really come up as kind of, I think, quite a triggering word at the moment for a lot of people. People who are feeling quite isolated at the moment, obviously, where we're not interacting in the same way that we used to. We're not seeing as many people day to day, and there's no certainty of, I suppose, when that's going to come back to some kind of regularity and new normality as well.
I think, again, loneliness is totally inevitable with social isolation. Like, we are human and social beings. We crave social contact, and even the importance of touch, like to have this kind of made up boundary that we're not allowed within a certain metre or 2 metres distance of other people is almost really despairing, when our kind of natural instinct is to want to kind of reach out and handhold and touch. I think loneliness comes in many different forms, even to the extent that we can be surrounded by people and feel lonely within that. But of course, I think the context we're talking about at the moment is actually the loneliness of isolation and being alone at home. And of course, there's different ways and means of trying to overcome that, and platforms such as this is absolutely one. So what we do know from mental health research is that social isolation negatively impacts mental health, and social connection, so social engagement, promotes mental health. So it promotes emotional resilience, it promotes psychological well-being. So any way that we can find connection, whether that's like-minded people, whether that's and I know we're working with an online platform, but not everyone uses social media, not everyone has access to social media. So actually, how do we take this sense of, I'm feeling lonely and I'm bored of doing it on the screen and these digital devices, how can I feel part of something bigger? And an example would be, perhaps many people have experienced more of a sense of community, whether you live in, a block of flats or on a row of houses. I know certainly for myself, I've spent a lot of time on my doorstep. I know a lot more neighbours than I knew previously. People putting notes through the door, helping, those that are vulnerable, or shielding. So feeling part of the space that you're in and the people that are around you can also create that sort of collective to help overcome loneliness. I'd also suggest, even if you're, by yourself as one individual being, you are still part of something bigger and greater. So even just going for a walk, along the canal or through the park, and actually just being a sense of who else is around you, you are part of something. And I think that's where sort of yoga philosophy really fits in as well, is that actually when we can hold in mind that, yes, I'm this one human being, but I'm part of something bigger. I'm part of a collective. I'm part of a population. I'm part of a people. We might be experiencing something individually, but we are part of a collective.
Definitely. And I think it's been really interesting to see how people have come together in these different and unique ways. And I don't know if you found this in your work, and if anyone listening has found this as well, that actually it seems to have created a platform which enables people to feel more comfortable talking about mental health, being online. It seems to have taken down some kind of barrier. I know that I haven't spoken about, my own personal experience with mental health as much as I have during lockdown, because of having these online platforms where I think people feel more comfortable talking in the space of their own home than being in kind of big groups, or being in studios or in classes or in sessions. But I think that can actually be one of the almost silver linings that's come out of this. I think it has almost kind of kick-started the discussion about mental health and made it a bit more at the centre of what people are focusing on and doing, because it's kind of highlighted the importance of mental health at the moment, and how we can all look after each other in different ways, and as you said, through different ways of connecting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really making it a lot more part of the conversation, in a way that we're all kind of putting our hands up and saying, I'm struggling too. And this whole COVID situation, it has to touch all of us in a variety of different ways. I think there's a phrase of the corona coaster, is that it? Like, there's probably there's some peaks, but there's some troughs, and it's a bloody long ride, and we're all on it together. So
100%.
But it certainly does make it a lot more accessible to be maybe like owning the feelings that we're having and really voicing them.
Definitely. I think it's allowing people to open up a bit more, because everyone's experiencing a very similar um, experience, I suppose, of change, of uncertainty, of everything changing for everybody. I think it's safe to say that there's probably not one person who hasn't been affected by the current climate, by COVID-19 over the past kind of 3 to 6 months, in quite a substantial way.
And actually, I think it's probably making people more active listeners of one another, like more compassionate towards others, in not just the people that are voicing, saying, hey, I feel like this, but I think others are listening more compassionately, like giving them a space to be heard.
Yeah, definitely.
That may otherwise not have done before.
Definitely. Someone's having fun in the background.
Oh, sorry, can you hear that?
It's good to hear people having fun.
Community. The kids are out on their bikes, not touching.
That's good. That's good. And so we've been talking in the past kind of 5 weeks. We've been really focusing on anxiety in this group, as you know, Steph. But and we've talked about different ways of responding to anxiety, and looking at triggers, and looking at how we can kind of bring in different tools and techniques. From your work and your experience, how would you kind of advise someone to manage or help support themselves with their anxiety during this time? Because I know at the moment, the NHS is really stretched. It's really difficult to get hold of resources at the moment, and to speak to therapists and things, because there's just such a demand. What kind of advice would you give to someone who's struggling at the moment with anxiety, maybe something that existed, or maybe something that's become heightened because of the current situation we're in?
There's so much to say here, and I think first and foremost, anxiety has to be viewed as normal. Like it's we all have a nervous system, we all have a stress response, we all have a relaxation response. Anxiety as a response to a stressful situation is normal. Like we all it doesn't make it pleasant, it doesn't make it bearable, it sometimes makes it crippling when it's really, really intense, yes, but particularly the context that we're in, and I've used this word sort of trauma reaction for some as well, is that anxiety is a normal response to this. Anxiety is a stress response to a stressful situation. So firstly, when we can start to view anxiety as something that's happening to us, rather than something that's happening that is my fault or within me, or labeling myself as I'm an anxious person, like this is your body responding to protect you from the stress that's going on around. So I think starting to understand what anxiety is for you is awareness is the first key, really, because we can make lots and lots of different recommendations, but certain things are going to speak to certain people more. So some people might experience anxiety really physically, like the nausea in the stomach, the tightness in the chest, the shallowness of the breath. Other people might experience anxiety as the kind of catastrophic thinking, the worry seed that's planted and goes into a tornado that's really consuming in the mind. And perhaps those approaches are a little bit different depending on how you're experiencing anxiety. What we do know is that anxiety works on both the physiology, which is the body, and the psychology, which is the mind. So if we want the first thing that I will always go to, and I'm probably, we're probably aligned in a group of more yogic type people, bearing in mind the context that we're meeting, but is breathing exercises. And I'm sure, Liz, you've probably spoken lots about the science of the breath and the nervous system, but actually in recommending breathing exercises to people often say, oh no, but they don't work. And they work at a certain level at a certain time, depending on, if you're nipping it in the bud, if you're preventing, or if the anxiety's already gone kind of too far, if that makes sense. But what we do know is when we can bring something like coherent breathing, which is about 5 to 6 breaths per minute, we're actively slowing down the breathing rate, and the lungs are telling messages to the brain via the vagus nerve to say, slow down, you've got this, you can relax, you're safe.
Mm-hmm.
And the brain needs to hear the message that you're safe. So that's when you practice coherent breathing for over 3 minutes, that's you're directly using the breath as a vehicle to communicate with the brain, let's slow down and come into the relaxation response. So that is a tool that you can always go to. And it's you can find like on YouTube or some like little apps where they kind of have the sort of ringer and the tone for when you breathe in and when you breathe out. So breathing exercises are always my go-to. Grounding. So quite often if people are feeling anxious or overwhelmed, we might dissociate from our body, like not feel present, not feel in the room, not feel in reality, feel like a little bit grey, or just feel like we're floating. The more that we can come back into our body, the more we'll experience the present moment. So grounding could be anything from lifting and lowering your feet, like marching on the spot. It could be shaking. I don't know if anyone's done like some sort of yoga classes where you do like some kind of like actual physical like shake down, like jumping up and down to kind of, it's like shaking out the stress, literally. Doing body-based practices. Grounding could be, so that's more coming into the body. It could be coming back into the space. So like, okay, what room am I in? Let me name 5 things I can see, 4 things I can smell, 3 colours. So you're actually actively processing what's around you. So it's working with the senses to be coming back into the moment.
Yeah.
Those are all kind of the I'd say more body things.
Yeah. The kind of quite mindful practices. So I think mindfulness is one of the things that can be really, really useful when you're feeling anxious, as you were saying, to kind of bring awareness to the breathing mindfully, to bring yourself into the present through grounding, and to make sure that I think with anxiety especially, it's focusing on what's going on in our heads and not actually paying much attention to what's going on around us. And that can obviously have an effect on the body, an effect on us physically, and an effect on us emotionally. So I think anything we can do to kind of take ourselves out of that headspace and into the body, into the breath, the present moment, can be so helpful.
So I think of it as like bottom up or top down. And of course, when our mind is spiraling, it's like we don't know where our feet are because we're already worrying about tomorrow or next year, or like this story that we've created, which is just saturated in angst and negativity. So it's like the mind isn't going to calm down if you say, hey, chill out. So we do know that the body is older than the mind, and the brain has to listen to the body. So if we can work on the space of the body through the simple things I've described, just shifting the anxiety down a little. Once you start to lower the anxiety, so kind of soothe the nervous system, then the mind can start to, instead of having its like tunnel vision thinking, where it's like, you know, all focused on that one thing, the perspective starts to open, the thoughts start to slow down rather than race. And that's when we can start to cognitively process, so rationalize and think, you know, what if something really bad happens? Okay, all right. What if it doesn't?
Yeah.
Okay, what if this happens? Okay, let's question, how likely is it? What evidence do I have that this is going to happen? Like, let's think of positive alternatives. Let's reframe. Whose story is that? What's going on now? And that's when we can use the cognitive processes to start to question differently.
Definitely. That's a really interesting idea of looking at it that way, actually questioning, you know, your anxious thoughts. And when our worries and when our anxieties become spirals and we catastrophize them, they become very much out of our control, and they become these kind of radical extremes that are kind of, you know, so far away in the future. And it can actually be so powerful to come back and to say, actually, you know, what story is this? What evidence do I have that this could be true?
It's so hard to do that when we're so trapped in it, because it's like it's totally gone. And I think, you know, in the context of anxiety being around more or being higher with, you know, of course, like the coronavirus, etc., this is all about uncertainty. So again, there's returning to the idea of trauma. We've been thrown into uncertain times suddenly, rapidly, with, you know, not just in one context of home or family or work, not even the context of London or England, like globally. Wow. Yeah, and as human beings, we crave stability, we crave certainty, we crave that homeostasis that says, oh, I'm settled now, let's keep things on a straight line, even though that we know we don't grow from straight lines. Like, we grow through adversity, we grow through change, we need evolution, but as human beings we don't like uncertainty, because we want that guarantee. And actually a lot of almost training anxiety is about learning to sit with that sit with uncertainty. So that is a really key phrase of, how do I sit with the unknown? How do I sit with something that I can't guarantee tomorrow? How do I experience this feeling that is not pleasant in my body, but actually the more I sit with it, the more I like build up a tolerance to it, and the more I build up a tolerance to it, the less it will impact me. So yeah, that's more about kind of, again, returning to mindfulness and being able to bear the feelings that you're sitting with, rather than like pushing them away.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's so true as well, and lends very well to one of the other kind of focuses or topics that people have come forward to ask us to discuss, is self-esteem, and how this idea of uncertainty in work, in, you know, this change of lifestyle. A lot of people have lost their jobs in the pandemic. A lot of people have had a very big shift in income and those kind of things, and maybe in their own relationship with their body and how they're feeling about themselves and their self-esteem. How, I mean, do you have, I suppose working with teenagers especially, that must be something that really crops up. What kind of practices would you suggest for anyone who's feeling really low in themselves at the moment? I mean, I know that's a very big question, a very big question. How do we improve self-esteem? How long is it?
There's a little pot of confidence and a little pot of self-esteem, just like honey.
Exactly.
Oh, I wish. Yeah, do you know, actually, Liz, as you're talking, the key thing that's coming to mind, and you're right, actually working with young people and teenagers in particular, self-esteem is so led by like peer groups, social comparison, and of course thoughts of like, am I good enough? And even as adults, how many of us have imposter syndrome? Am I doing a good enough job? Or that, I call it the dark art of comparison. Like, you know, it's just not helpful, really. I love that. But yeah, certainly in the time at the moment with, you know, people losing jobs, I think it's a real being kind of thrown into the fire of deep soul searching, like actually questioning, well, what's my sense of worth? What is it? What's my purpose if I'm not? If so much of your identity and purpose is, say, attached to your job, this is an example, then lots of people might be questioning, well, why do I get up in the morning? And that can really, really be detrimental to mental health. So it's about not necessarily finding replacements, but about drawing back to values. This is one of the key things in the way that I work in therapy, is actually what is your value base? What are the things that are important to you? What brings meaning? What brings joy? And in what way? Because actually, when you can live a life that is more led by values rather than kind of external expectations, that's exactly where your sense of purpose and your esteem lies. So practicing meaningful things that you're passionate about, that are aligned with who you want to be and what you do. Another thing I'm thinking about is one of the main phrases from compassion-focused therapy. And with compassion-focused therapy, it's very helpful for trying to calm the inner critic. So that inner critic that, you know, we all have, that's the negative thought that says, you know, you're not good enough, you should do more, no one likes you, you're this, you're that. Sometimes, particularly in times of stress, that inner critic is getting louder. It's like, you know, drowning us out. And we lose sight of, you know, the metaphorical hug from the soothing system. So one of the main tenets of compassion focused therapy is that it's not your fault. It's not your fault that you feel like this stuff has happened to you, it's happened around you, but it's not your fault. And the more that we can bring that into trying to understand our mental health in response to this whole corona thing, is that things are outside of our control. It's not my fault.
Yeah.
But what I can do is re-own the agency that I have, the decisions that I make for myself every day. So it's going back to the sense of, what are the external things that I can't control, and this is the situation that I'm in. And even if it's a bitter pill to swallow, practicing on accepting that, and then not self-punishing, not going down the route of self-shaming, trying to silence that inner critic and actually being a lot more compassionate to yourself and trying to kind of rebuild confidence that way.
Definitely. We've talked in the past sessions about using a compassionate voice. I know that comes from compassion-based therapy, this idea of actually creating a character or using a voice of a loved one who speaks to you with kindness. And when you notice yourself moving into that critical voice, actually replacing it or responding with a more compassionate, loving voice. And I know from my experience of trying that for the past kind of 5 years, I've been using that practice. It has actually had a really big effect on the way that I talk to myself, and being much less harsh in the language I use internally. And I think when we can begin to shift that and actually speak to ourselves with a bit more compassion, it lends it to how we speak to others as well, and how we actually, the language we use internally and externally.
Absolutely. And that goes forth on so many layers. It's, you know, is it a compassionate thought? You know, the thought that says you're not good enough. Well, a compassionate thought might say you're doing the best you can.
Yeah.
Compassionate behavior versus, you know, the inner critic might want to self-sabotage, but the compassionate behavior will say, just do what you can, do what you can for now, or allow you to do something that's, you know, going to nourish you, going to nurture you.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, thank you, my love. I have one question from Tiran. Thank you for sharing, my love. He said, is it the flight or freeze response from the System 1 brain, Steph?
Yeah, I don't know. I saw that. I don't know what you mean by System 1 brain. I'm like, oh, this is new terminology. What's that? Educate me. What do you mean by System 1? So if you can maybe type, but I can speak about the fight, all the F's, the fight or flight or freeze or flop response. So in our brain we have okay, so the brain structure, the oldest part of the brain is what is attached to the brainstem. That's kind of the core of the brain, and that's what does the kind of nervous system kind of regulation, you know, all of our internal processes like heart rate, digestion, all of that stuff. So then you have the next layer of the brain, which is the midbrain, and that's where we have non-deliberate side of the brain, the unconscious brain. Okay, System 1, so I should probably know that. So then the next layer of the brain, we have the layer of the brain where we kind of deal with emotions. It's the midbrain. It's all about kind of relationships. And then the third layer, which is kind of where we are intelligent human beings and we do our planning and organizing and work and all the rest of it. So the amygdala is a part of the brain that is known as the kind of alarm system. It's the thing that sounds really loudly that sets off the fight or flight response. So this is kind of in evolutionary terms, the nervous system reacts automatically. You don't have to, so yes, it is unconscious and it is automatic. So you don't have to ask your body to run away out of danger. It's like, it's out the door already. So that's our survival mechanism. So what happens, particularly with anxiety and stress, is that the pathways become super sensitive to the amygdala. So imagine a fire alarm in your, you know, in your flat or your house or your work it's just going off all the time, like it's just triggered. You know, say you've burnt some cooking, you're like, oh, the fire alarm's gone off again. It's literally like that. So what we need to do is almost desensitize the amygdala so that, yes, it functions, but it's not going to kind of overreact to everything. And that's what a lot of some of the practices that Liz and I have mentioned in this talk already really work on, like quietening down the pathways, so the fire alarm doesn't sound off so much.
Yeah, brilliant. I love that analogy. Fire alarm, and that completely resonates. So I've got a question from May. I will answer this one, May, and then we'll come to doing the practice stuff. Doing one of the practices together. His sessions always move too quickly. So May, thank you for sharing. How do you process growth from failings with compassion? Personally, it feels like compassion is forgiveness and healing rather than the push for growth.
How do you process growth from failings with compassion? Personally, it feels like compassion is forgiveness and healing rather than the push for growth. Interesting. Just trying to process the question. So my understandings and compassion focused therapy is something that I trained in several years ago and use it really, really regularly for exactly the same reasons that Liz has spoken about. I think it's really, really powerful and meets the needs of a lot of people in different ways. So the sort of founder of compassion focused therapy is Paul Gilbert. Feel free to look him up. He also runs regular conferences and workshops. His website, I'm not here to promo, but it's really useful, is The Compassionate Mind, and they have free resources and audios on there. Another main sort of pioneer is Kirsten Neff, N-E-F-F. Again, also kind of great resources on their website. My understanding from trainings is that compassion isn't only about empathy. So let's say you see someone fall over in the street and you kind of feel sorry for them and maybe go to help. When we're in a place of quite dark depression or negativity or questioning our own self-worth, we might fall over and be like, oh God, I'm so stupid, I'm embarrassed, and really self-shame. So that's just an analogy of like how typically it's so easy for us to offer compassion to others and not offer the same help to ourselves. So compassion isn't only about empathy. It's not only about being able to experience the suffering of another person. It's about the active intention to remove that suffering. And that's where compassion lies. So that's my understanding of the definition. So it's not only the ability to be empathic, but it's the intention to remove the suffering.
Brilliant, thank you.
That answers your question, I hope. Thanks so much, Kirsten. Yeah.
So I wonder if now, if we move on to our reflective exercise stuff that we're going to get everybody to do together, we can all grab our pens and paper and just do a little bit of reflective practice today as well. And then we will open up for kind of more discussions, and we'll also just discuss some tools and techniques that you can take away and practice around self-care and how we can kind of prioritize that at the moment as we begin to navigate our way into this kind of new normality that is the buzzword of the moment.
Okay, yeah, so the way that Liz and I work when we sort of run workshops together is very sort of encouraging reflections. So we're not, we don't know if you keep a regular sort of diary or journal, but we really advocate for the beauty of reflection, to think about how far you've come and what's been going on for you, to try and process it in order to make change and go forward. Because it's so easy just to be caught where we're at and rush forward, but it's about understanding and making sense going back in order to make a smoother path as you journey forward. So if you've got your pen and paper, we'll just be a couple of minutes, so I'll ask some questions out and give you a couple of moments to respond, but I'd like you to think about a challenge for you during lockdown, and firstly identify what that was. And then once you've identified that challenge, can you say how you overcame it? And that might be overcoming. That challenge might still be around, and that's okay. And in that how you overcame it, what enabled you to overcome it? It could be what, it could be whom. And if we were to make some commitments going forward, so with some of the things that Liz and I have spoken about during this talk, and different ways that you can be looking after yourself, bearing in mind this is self-care club, in overcoming the challenges and obstacles of COVID and overcoming anxiety, I'd like you to think about what overcoming it looks like tomorrow. So as in, what can you do? What little things can you do towards overcoming anxiety by day? A day-to-day thing. So I'd like you to name a day-to-day thing that you can do that will support you to overcome the challenges of lockdown or anxiety. And in the same way as you're identifying it, a commitment of something you can do daily, now identify something that you can do maybe weekly. What would that look like week to week? Something you can do once a week. So you're creating here, firstly, an awareness of where the challenges and stress are. You're identifying how you have been able or working on overcoming them. And going forward, some practices that actually are doable. They don't have to be big, life-changing, game-changer things, but maybe it's going out for a walk for 10 minutes a day. Maybe it's having a morning routine, but just think of stuff you can do day and by week.
I think this really feeds in, Steph, to this idea of creating a self-care schedule for yourself that is something daily that you can do, something that you commit to. But I think, and I speak from experience, that with the best will in the world, we can, attend this group once a week, which is also an act of self-care in itself.
Yes.
Carve this time out, and then I often find that I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to get up and I'm going to do yoga every single morning, I'm going to do breath work every single night, I'm going to do an hour of journaling, and you set yourself up for too much pressure. And actually, if you can make it something that you enjoy, something that becomes quite easy to slot into your routine, and something that you look forward to, maybe something instead of I'm going to go for a 10k run, I'm going to go for a 10-minute walk.
Yeah, absolutely.
Get out in nature, rather than actually setting yourself targets that put more pressure on you and can add to your anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely. It needs to be kind of really achievable and enjoyable, accessible, like, otherwise question whose goals are these, if they're like what society thinks I should do or what my neighbor thinks I should do, then don't do it. Like, think about what is meaningful and purposeful to you. And perhaps writing the commitment now, just for today I will. And perhaps this is a mantra, something that you can bring in each morning. Just for today I will. So herein lies the commitment and the intention. So we're not only acknowledging our emotional experience, but we are actively intending to do something different to better our well-being. Just for today I will. Okay, so I hope that those few questions have landed some thoughts. Obviously, is it something new we commit to do as you wish? Whatever is going to kind of be most helpful. Maybe it's something that you used to do that you really loved and no longer do, or something that is good for you but is never prioritized. Just draw back and think about actually what nourishes me. What calms the anxiety down, what makes me feel better, what makes me feel good about myself. And it's those small shifts. It's not even, when we can bring consistency in, doing something regularly, as Liz said, with part of like a self-care routine, that's when we start to see shifts over time.
And Steph, this leads on very naturally, very well to the final thing that we wanted to discuss today, which was just from your experience. What would you kind of say are your top 3 tools? And they could be things you use or things that you recommend for people around self-care, kind of simple things that we can bring into our everyday routine that you found really helpful.
Yeah. I mean, I know the kind of yogic part of me is really, really biased, so I'm obviously going to bang on about that kind of practice, really. But I do advocate that it's for each person what is most helpful for you. To give an example, I've been meditating for over, 8 years or something. But that doesn't mean I'm certainly not enlightened, and it doesn't mean that sometimes I sit down and just create my to-do list for the day. So at different times, different practices will speak to you. So for example, following a breakup, it was way too much for me to even attempt to sit in meditation because I was alone with really overwhelming thoughts. So therefore I kind of gave up on that for a while, but then did something else instead. And that's when I was practicing yoga like solidly every morning, because I needed to be out of my head and in my body. So the last few months for me, what has become a really like solid ritual is meditation in the morning, followed by journaling for I'd say about 15 minutes. 30 minutes is just not realistic within the schedule. Again, like Liz said, you need to be realistic with what fits. But with journaling, it's just processing. So I'm not doing content. I'm not saying yesterday I went to the shops, yesterday I did this. It's like letting out emotions. This morning I feel a bit angry, my energy is a bit low, or like, I'm really look forward to this. Just allowing that unconscious process to really unfold. And then following that, I do movement. So that might be yoga, it might be running. There's been days where I've kind of not really been bothered to run and been like, hey, you know what, this is okay. What do you want right now? And often if I'm in a place of feeling a bit overwhelmed and overworked, I just want silence and I just want nature. So I take myself down to the canal and have a little walk. So nature has been a really, really big influence. Having boundaries around routine has actually an ongoing struggle for me to have boundaries around workload, but I think boundarying your own time is so, so important. So I'm sure at the start of lockdown, lots of us were, connecting all over the place and jumping on Zoom and having all these group calls, but it's noise, So actually having my own space for silence at different times has been really, really important. Sounds superficial, but pampering is a really big part of my self-care routine, because it just makes me feel good. Eating healthily, trying to get enough sleep, so that these are all kind of basic things that have become embedded in a self-care routine.
Yeah, and all things that can affect our mental health so much, actually. Often I think it's the simple things that we overlook, like trying to get enough sleep, connecting with nature, taking a walk, moving our bodies, not necessarily in, as you were saying, Steph, not necessarily in a really dynamic yoga class or a really long run, but just in some way where you're physically moving and actually getting tension out of the physical body and out of the head can be so
and they're not kind of rocket science tools or tips. They are just the makeup of well-being. And I really recommend recording. So like recording your sleeping pattern, what time you wake, what time you go to sleep, how many hours you've had, recording your exercise, recording your meals, because actually you'll then start to see patterns like, oh, well, I felt really down on Wednesday, but I didn't sleep well Tuesday night. So it's when you can see patterns, it becomes more clearly where you need to make change, for sure.
Definitely. And I think getting into that habit, Tirantha's just popped in the chat, can you explain journaling? And I think there's two different types of journaling that I've experienced through when I was having my own therapy and when I'm working with clients for wellbeing and yoga therapy, is the journaling you described, Steph, where you're literally getting out your thoughts, getting your feelings and expressing how you're feeling day to day and kind of connecting with how your body's feeling, how you're feeling mentally, maybe reflecting on what you need from that day as well. And then this other side of the journaling where you can keep a track of how things are affecting you. And when I was really anxious and feeling really, really heightened reactions to anxiety, panic attacks, physical reactions. I used to get a huge rash that came up on my face when I was really, really anxious, which, added to my anxiety. But beginning to reflect on actually what was triggering that was a really, really powerful act of self-care, actually. And I used to just spend 5 minutes at the start of the day and 5 minutes at the end of the day looking back at what I'd done throughout the day and keeping a journal of activities, and then looking at what triggered anxiety for me. And I think you can do the same with depression, you can do the same with other kinds of mental health things, with insomnia, with things that might affect our well-being, and actually taking the time to reflect and almost become like your own therapist or your own well-being coach.
Totally, yeah.
Put your self-care back into your hands as well. It can,
yeah.
You're in control a bit more.
And that's something, we all do, even when we feel like we don't have choice. We all still do have power and agency. Even when we feel helpless and hopeless, we still have our own choice. And what I advocate to every single person I work with is that you are an expert in your own experience. You are the person that has lived your life, and you do know best. So yes, we go to experts and professionals for advice and guidance, but they're there to scaffold you on the journey, because sometimes we go a little bit off course, and that's okay. But actually, you are the expert in your own life. It's just helping you to re-establish that.
Yeah, definitely.
And I've just seen a comment from Arena about sometimes not being able to focus on writing, and I totally hear that. Like, we go to different things at different times. I really like the idea of recording voice messages, because again, it's verbalizing, isn't it? It's kind of processing, dumping it somewhere, getting it out.
And I think that's a really good example of actually listening. You know, if journaling doesn't work for you, don't force yourself to do a practice that actually doesn't make you, it doesn't help and isn't effective for your mental health, your well-being. And kind of listening to those things, as you were saying, Steph, kind of reflecting on the things that work for you, what you find nourishing, rather than what you know, a blog tells you should find nourishing.
Absolutely.
Not everybody loves yoga. Not everybody can sit in meditation and find it helpful all the time. So I think it's working out what it is for you. And I know we've talked in other sessions, and we've spent some time actually reflecting on what self-care means for you. I think that can be a really great exercise to maybe do at the end of this session on your own, is just to take a piece of paper and write down the things that actually make you feel good, the things that make you feel nourished, like what you define self-care as for you, whether that be painting, actually taking the time to make, you know, a nutritious meal rather than grabbing something off the shelf. And I think all those things can be really powerful acts of self-care. It doesn't have to be, you know, expensive courses or expensive investments. It can be really, really simple things that we bring into our day and prioritize.
Like music, art, creativity, nature, all of the things that can be done for free.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. So I've just realised the time. Guys,